Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order pursuant to Committee Rule 5B and House Rule 11-2H4. The Chair may postpone further proceedings today on any question of approving any measure or matter or adopting amendment on which a recorded vote or the ayes and nays are ordered. And without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. And with that, I would recognize my friend from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, congratulations on your first markup as chairman, and we look forward to working with you. And I think today's is going to be a smooth process. I also want to, on behalf of the whole committee, welcome our newest member, Jimmy Gomez, to the Oversight Committee. Welcome, Congressman Gomez. Congressman Gomez represents California's 34th congressional district, comes to Congress having served as the chair of the California Assembly's Appropriations Committee. In his time as an assemblyman, Congressman Gomez championed California's expansion of paid family leave and authored important legislation to increase access to higher education and health care, promote transparency through campaign finance disclosure, and promote environmental justice. I believe Representative Gomez is going to be a wonderful addition to the committee, and he was among the first here this morning, a good way to start. Welcome, Congressman Gomez.
Mr. Gomez, you are recognized if you would like to speak, and welcome. As you noted on the House floor, Leader McCarthy made you famous before you got here. We are thrilled to have you. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much, and congratulations on your first day as chair. I also want to thank the ranking member and vice ranking member Connolly for all of their support and warm welcome. As I said on the floor, I was sworn in to the 34th Congressional District to fight for the working families of my district and our state and our values. It's an honor to be here with my colleagues from both sides of the aisle as we safeguard transparency, open government, and democracy. I look forward to exercising Congress's constitutional duty to investigate any action by the administration that seeks to subvert our democracy and harm the public that we serve. I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and welcome again. Our first item for consideration is H.R. 3244 to amend Title V U.S. Code to provide for annual surveys of federal employees. The clerk would designate the bill.
H.R. 3244 to amend Title V United States Code to provide for annual surveys of federal employees and for other purposes.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point without objection. So ordered. It's my understanding the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, will offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership. And as this is your first markup, we look forward to making it go smoothly and without controversy. This particular amendment in the nature of a substitute actually works to try to facilitate the employee survey that typically gets administered through the Office of Personnel Management on a regular basis. This survey has been known as the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, and it enables federal employees to share their perception on a host of topics, including their assessment of their agency leadership, the work environment, opportunities for professional development. As it gets implemented, obviously, the Partnership for Public Service uses these results to actually rank the employee perspectives and gauge agency morale. As the agency responsible for overseeing the federal workforce, the Office of Personnel Management has assumed this responsibility for administering the survey for a vast majority of the federal government. In administering this survey, they actually write the questions to be asked to all federal employees, which allows for a comparison across the government. Last year, however, in this very room, we heard testimony from OPM that they had indeed issued a rule removing many of the current survey questions from the regulations implementing the survey. Now, this move was actually aimed at giving OPM more flexibility to modernize the questions, which certainly we are all for modernization. But as my friend Mr. Conley and I expressed concern at that subcommittee hearing on government operations, we were concerned that some of the questions were not being protected in the regulation, and that they may change at the whim of any administration seeking to make employee feedback look better than it actually was. So my bill would only require OPM to submit to Congress any survey-related regulations before they become final. It will also require OPM to make publicly available any changes to the survey questions and provide justification to Congress for these changes. I'd like to thank the Partnership for Public Service for providing input to this committee on the development of this legislation, and I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter of support from them.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill or the amendment in nature of a substitute? Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank my subcommittee chairman, Mr. Meadows, and my friend Representative Heiss for their leadership and for working together with me on H.R. 3244, of which I'm a proud original co-sponsor. Since 2015, Representative Meadows and I have held annual subcommittee hearings on the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey and the Partnership for Public Services Best Places in the Federal Government Rankings, which rely on the survey. We both believe that the morale and engagement of Federal employees is critical to ensuring an efficient and productive Federal government, because studies have shown that an engaged workforce is a productive workforce. One important measure of employee engagement is the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. Our bill is a response to a December 2016 final rule published by the Office of Personnel Management that reduced the number of required questions in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. Although we obtained assurances from OPM that questions would not be eliminated from the 2017 survey, Representative Meadows and I were concerned that eliminating or changing survey questions would in fact make it difficult to compare survey results and determine trends. The substitute amendment makes certain technical changes to the introduced bill. The amendment would require OPM to maintain its current responsibility for issuing regulations prescribing the questions that must appear on all agency surveys, and the requirement for agencies to make the survey results public, unless doing so would jeopardize national security. It would also require OPM to submit any survey-related regulation to this committee and the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs 60 days before its issuance. This amendment would enhance this committee's oversight of OPM's administration of the survey with a view toward preserving the ability to analyze historic trends. The only other improvement I would suggest is for us to obtain data on agency use of incentives to encourage employees to participate in the survey. I'll be offering an amendment to the substitute when you call for it, Mr. Chairman. I believe it's been acceptable on your side, and I urge my colleagues to support both amendments. Thank you.
Chairman yields back. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill or the amendment in nature of a substitute? We're now ready to start the amendment process. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the substitute amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3244, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, is recognized for 5 minutes to explain the amendment. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
I thank the Chair. Some agencies have used various kinds of incentives to encourage Federal employees to participate in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. These incentives have included Starbucks gift cards, free lunches, and some amount of paid leave. I think it's important to encourage greater participation in the survey, but I understand that some stakeholders have expressed concern that those incentives could actually influence employee survey responses. That's a valid concern, if true, and my amendment would require the Government Accountability Office to study that issue and report back to this committee. GAO would be required to study the kinds of incentives agencies use to offer employees to participate in annual surveys and the impact, possibly, of such incentives on those employees and their responses. To help GAO in gathering this data, agencies would be required to report to the OPM on their use of incentives as part of the annual survey process. The amendment would provide additional transparency to the survey. It's been cleared on both sides of this committee, and I urge my colleagues to accept it. I yield back.
Chairman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to encourage all my colleagues to support the gentleman from Virginia's amendment. He and I have actually been working very closely, and I want to just give him a sincere compliment. Representing a district that perhaps has fewer federal employees, far fewer than his district, has been able to help me understand more completely and fully the importance not only of this survey, but of valuing our federal workforce. And so I would strongly urge my colleagues to support this amendment to the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Are there other members who wish to be heard? The question is now on the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Connolly. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Not. The question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended offered by Mr. Meadows. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. As previously announced, further proceedings on the question would be postponed except for it passed by voice vote. The question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 3244 as amendment to the House of Representatives. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 3031, the TSP Modernization Act of 2017. The clerk would designate the bill.
H.R. 3031 to amend Title V United States Code to provide for flexibility in making withdrawals from a thrift savings plan account and for other purposes.
Ask unanimous consent the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes to explain the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to express, we are on H.R. 3031, correct? Yeah. I want to express my support for the bill and TSP Modernization Act of 2017. And I thank Ranking Member Cummings and Government Operations Subcommittee Mark Meadows for their work on this common sense good government bill. This bill was a bipartisan bill introduced to make the federal government's thrift savings plan more closely aligned with private sector best practices and allow TSP participants more flexible withdrawal options. In 2013, the Federal Retirement Investment Thrift Board found that employees who separated from federal service transferred $9 billion out of TSP to other financial institutions. Why did they do this? Because private sector 401k plans provided more flexibility, and TSP participants wanted more options for withdrawing money in case they needed it. A 2014 survey of TSP participants who withdrew funds showed that more than 50% reported that they would like more flexibility to withdraw the funds to address life events. Current law limits participants to only one withdrawal from their TSP account while in federal service. And participants who make this type of age-based withdrawal cannot take another partial withdrawal once they separate from service. Similarly, participants who are separated from federal service and who have not made a prior age-based withdrawal are restricted to making only one partial separation withdrawal. H.R. 3031 would eliminate those restrictions and allow participants to make multiple age-based and post-separation withdrawals from their TSP accounts. The bill would also allow participants to elect to combine partial withdrawals with an annuity if they chose. It would also eliminate automatic annuities as a default option in the absence of an election by participants. By providing greater withdrawal flexibility, studies show that participants would more likely keep their assets actually in TSP accounts. For example, a study issued by Vanguard in 2013 found that 50% more participants and assets remain in retirement plans when partial distributions are allowed. So they know that's there if they want it. They don't need to withdraw all of their money. Providing more withdrawal options for federal employees and retirees in TSP may help their financial security, since administrative fees for the TSP are much lower than fees normally charged by other financial institutions. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter letters of support submitted by the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association, NARF, the American Federation of Government Employees, and the National Treasury Employees Union in support of this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair will now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to not only thank the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for very accurately and articulately laying out what this bill does, but I would be remiss in not acknowledging the absence of our good friend Elijah Cummings and truly his leadership on this particular area. And so it is with great pleasure that I join them in supporting this common sense bill. I mean, when we're looking at the work that is being done through the TSP, they do a great job, but we have to keep up with where we are in competition with the private sector. I think that this particular bill will not only be welcome to our federal employees, but also will allow for more dollars to stay in the TSP program, providing more continuity and more benefit for our federal workforce. It is widely supported. This bill also enjoys the support of both the federal employees groups and the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board. And I ask unanimous consent to enter the record of their support from the board.
Without objection.
And so I urge all my colleagues to support this particular effort. I think it sends a good message to our federal employees that we do care about what is happening to them. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from North Carolina yields back. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? Gentlelady from the District of Columbia.
Mr. Chairman, none of the leaders of this bill told us what was the reason for the single withdrawal in the first place. I suspect that whoever drew the bill thought they were protecting federal employees from themselves. I applaud this change. Perhaps they were afraid, perhaps what it led to, particularly in light of what you discovered, was over-withdrawing so that you'd have funds when you needed them. Look, we're in an age of tiny increases in what federal employees receive. And that it has been that way now for some years, and we're in a period when wages are even more of a problem than jobs. People's wages aren't going up. I read a statistic just today that said that half of the American people, if they had had to come up with $500, could not do so today. There's a lot to do with wages and with income. I fear that some of those may be federal employees, and I strongly support this amendment, which gives people the autonomy to decide when to withdraw and how much to withdraw. And I thank both of you for your work on this bill.
Gentlelady yields back. Do any other members wish to speak? We're now ready to start the amendment process. Are there any amendments to the bill? If none, the question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 3031 to the House of Representatives. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I would just ask unanimous consent that I be listed on the bill as an original co-sponsor after Mr. Cummings.
Without objection.
I thank the chair.
Yes, sir. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 378, the Bonuses for Cost Cutters Act of 2017. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 378, to amend Title V United States Code to enhance the authority under which federal agencies may pay cash awards to employees for making cost savings disclosures and for other purposes.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point without objection. So ordered. It is my understanding the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, will offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to the bill. Without objection, we will call up the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and I will recognize Mr. Duncan to give one statement on both the amendment in the nature of the substitute and the underlying bill. With that, the clerk will designate the amendment.
Well, thank you very much. Excuse me.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 378, offered by Mr. Duncan of Tennessee.
I now recognize Mr. Duncan for 5 minutes for a statement on the legislation and the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be very brief. I'm basically here representing my Tennessee colleague. Representative Chuck Flashman, who introduced this H.R. 378, the Bonuses for Cost Cutters Act of 2017. H.R. 378 permits agencies to award employees up to $20,000 for the disclosure of unnecessary expenses, an increase from the present limit of $10,000. I've been very interested in this for a long time. In 1993, I sponsored a bill that was assigned to what was then the House Committee on Government Operations. My bill would have authorized the heads of federal agencies to use up to 50% of unobligated funds for bonuses to personnel who found and reported waste, fraud, and abuse, or if an agency was able to save money in some way, because I'd heard so many stories about departments or agencies spending about 60 or 70% of their money in their first 11 months and then trying to spend very quickly, almost in many ways very wastefully, to spend the last, in that last month so their budgets wouldn't be cut. At that time, we were in the minority, and there was not a lot of interest in that bill. But this is, as I say, a variation of that bill, and I think it's a good bill. And so I urge support for this, and I appreciate the contributions that have been made, the thoughtful feedback from the minority, and also the co-sponsorship of our colleague, Congressman Cooper from Tennessee. And I yield back.
Chairman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for any statement on the bill or the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I thank the Chair. I'm a strong supporter of initiatives that increase efficiency and reduce waste in the federal government, and I believe this bill does that. Our federal government does important work, from protecting our national security to ensuring that the water we drink is safe, the air is clean, and to caring for our nation's veterans. Through legislation and diligent oversight, this committee helps ensure that our government operates efficiently and effectively while carrying out those important missions. When taxpayer dollars are wasted, nobody benefits. This bill aims to reduce wasteful spending by providing incentives for employees to identify cost savings and possible waste. It expands the awards program for federal employees who identify waste, fraud, and abuse to allow an agency to award an employee a bonus for the identification of wasteful expenditures. The bill also doubles the amount of an award available under the current statute from $10,000 to $20,000. It requires that agencies report information on disclosures of wasteful spending in their annual publicly available performance reporting. In addition, the bill contains a requirement that GAO report on the operation of the awards program within 3 years so Congress can continue to evaluate whether this legislation is working as intended. I want to thank Chairman Gowdy for working with us on this bill. Last year, Democratic members raised some concerns about a prior version of the bill, and Ranking Member Cummings asked Chairman Chaffetz then to work with him to address those concerns. The Chairman and our friends on the other side of the aisle did cooperate with us, and we were able to produce a bipartisan bill that ameliorates those concerns, and the result is a product I think we can all support. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back.
Chairman yields back. Do any other members who wish to speak on the bill or the amendment in the nature of a substitute? We're now ready to start the amendment process. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If not, the question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Duncan. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 378 as amended to the House of Representatives. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. With my colleagues' indulgence for one moment, I would like to welcome Congressman Greg Giaforte to the Oversight Committee. Greg represents the state of Montana at large and has lived in Montana for 40 years. Prior to Congress, he founded a software technology company providing lots of jobs to the good people of Montana. He and his wife, Susan, are the proud parents of 4 children. Congressman, we welcome you, and we look forward to working with you on the Oversight Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
as the shortest introductory welcoming speech in the history of the committee, but it's good because you will be handling the next bill. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 2897. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 2897, to authorize the mayor of the District of Columbia and the director of the National Park Service to enter into cooperative management agreements for the operation, maintenance, and management of units of the National Park System in the District of Columbia and for other purposes.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize the sponsor of the bill, Ms. Holmes Norton, for 5 minutes to explain the legislation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate you putting this bill 2897 on today's markup. Actually, this is a power that states and localities already have, and it could be argued that the district already has it as well, but since the District of Columbia isn't mentioned, I bring it forward for clarification only. It's a very non-controversial bill. It's unusual, and perhaps you've done this in your own districts. These are called cooperative management agreements. It allows the states and localities often that have Park Service land in their district to enter in agreements so that when the Park Service, one of the most underfunded agencies in the United States, isn't moving to do what you want to be done to park land, you can use your own local funds to do the very same thing. That's all that this does. We don't think the district was intentionally left out of this, and indeed it may be included, but I alert you to it because members may want to do the same thing. The city wants to enter into cooperative management agreements with the National Park Service for a very special reason. When you see these beautiful parks throughout the District of Columbia, including downtown, the District of Columbia, and downtown as you pass by, those are owned not by the District of Columbia, as most land in the District of Columbia is, but those are parks that are owned by the National Park Service. There is one, and this is the one we'd like to begin with, Franklin Park, right in the middle of town, but it has seen many better days. Our district, our business community wants to work with us, our downtown business community, in order to put amenities in this park like foods and gardens and services. We'd love to have this happen. Park Service isn't able to do this on its budget, and the district would work with our own business community to do it. As a matter of fact, I think many more who live in this region or who visit this region would benefit from what will be added to this park, which is green space in the middle of downtown Washington, if this bill passes. This is really a rare bill because essentially a local jurisdiction is saying to a federal agency, cooperate with us and we'll pay for it. The wheel turns out to be business community, but it's a way to take federal land and make the highest and best use of it. Here in the District of Columbia, we're a big city. It does matter that all of this green space be used, and I ask for your votes on this bill.
Gentlelady yields back. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Gianforte, for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And H.R. 2897 will allow the District of Columbia to work with the National Park Service to rehabilitate the parks, and in particular, Franklin Square Park. The district has over 7,000 acres of open space and parks that require maintenance, upkeep, and enhancements due to age. Ownership of this immense acreage is split between private entities, the D.C. government, and the National Park Service. This split makes it difficult for the district to make improvements to its open spaces that are in the interest of the city, its residents, and visitors alike. This bill will allow the district and the National Park Service to work together to make our capital's green spaces places where people will spend time. H.R. 2897 provides the necessary authority for the district and the National Park Service to enter into cooperative agreements for the upkeep and maintenance of the parks and these open spaces. The bill will also allow the district to use local funds to maintain and enhance our capital's parks. The D.C. local government supports this proposal. H.R. 2897 is a good piece of legislation that responds to the needs of the nation's capital, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Virginia.
I thank you. I want to thank our newest colleague from Antenna. Welcome to the committee, and thank him for his first act, a bipartisan act. The bill is a win-win for the federal government and the District of Columbia, and we want to make it crystal clear they can enter into cooperative arrangements. A word of caution. At the end of the day, however, local governments, state governments can't be a substitute for federal responsibility. We have an $11.3 billion backlog in maintenance funds and deferred maintenance by the National Park Service, and sooner or later this Congress is going to have to tackle that. In the interim, however, agreements such as this can allow spot projects, specific targeted parks, to be improved with the cooperation of the local authorities. It's a good bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members wish to be heard? We're now ready to start the amendment process. Are there any amendments to the bill? If none, the question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 2897 to the House of Representatives. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered favorably reported without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 3210, Securely Expediting Clearances Through Reporting Transparency Act of 2017. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 3210, to require the Director of the National Background Investigations Bureau to submit a report on the backlog of personnel security clearance investigations and for other purposes.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, for 5 minutes to explain the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 3210 is a step toward addressing the security clearance investigation backlog that's plaguing federal agencies and contractors. There are over 500,000 overdue background investigations throughout the federal government. That backlog causes waste as new employees wait for their clearances and increased security risk as reinvestigations of clearance holders are postponed. Fixing the backlog problem requires an understanding of the problem, the size of the backlog, its composition, and its cause. Currently, there is no requirement for the National Background Investigations Bureau to provide any of this data to Congress. The bill requires the National Background Investigations Bureau to submit a quarterly report for the next 5 years detailing the size of the investigation backlog. The report must describe the current average time to complete a background investigation. In addition, the report must include specific details by clearance level and type of investigation. With this report, Congress can more easily track performance by federal investigators with the ultimate aim of creating an efficient process for ensuring that only those who can be trusted with access to classified national security information receive due. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our colleague from Florida. Congressman Steve Knight and I introduced the Securely Expediting Clearances Through Reporting Transparency Act, or the SECRET Act, to enable Congress to monitor the efficiency of background investigation processes. Our bill imposes a common-sense requirement on the National Background Investigations Bureau to report to Congress on the backlogs that develop in the background investigation process. Backlogs have been a problem. In 2004, when the Department of Defense was the lead agency performing such background investigations, the GAO determined that the backlog was 375 days, over a year. Over 100,000 new investigations were delayed because of that backlog. In response, Congress transferred responsibility for background investigations to the Office of Personnel Management and more recently created the National Background Investigations Bureau within OPM. H.R. 3210 will provide Congress with transparency needed to conduct oversight of the National Background Investigations Bureau and prevent backlogs in the future. I urge the committee to support it, and I will have a modest amendment that's been agreed to, I believe, on both sides when that's appropriate. I yield back.
Gentleman from Virginia yields back. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? We're now ready to start the amendment process. Are there any amendments to the bill? Gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very simple amendment. First of all, I want to
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 3210, offered by Mr. Krishnamurthy of Illinois.
Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Krishnamurthy, is recognized for 5 minutes to explain the amendment, and without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. This is a very simple amendment. It requires the director of the National Background Investigations Bureau to report to Congress on the process for conducting and adjudicating security clearance requests for the Executive Office of the President. It recently came to light that in June 2016, senior members of the Trump campaign, including Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and current White House senior advisor Jared Kushner, met with a Kremlin-connected Russian lawyer and her associates. Yet more disturbing is the fact that Mr. Kushner neglected to disclose this meeting and other foreign contacts when he initially submitted his SF-86 form to receive security clearance. Later, when he submitted an amended version of this same form, the SF-86, he again failed to include this meeting. Only on June 21st, 2 days before he was scheduled to have an interview with the FBI regarding a permanent security clearance, did he finally disclose this meeting. While we are still learning the full extent of Russian interference in Western democracies, it is incumbent upon us as members of Congress to ensure that those with access to the most sensitive information are thoroughly vetted. My amendment would fulfill this duty by directing the director of the National Background Investigations Bureau to include in his report to Congress the process by which personnel of the Executive Office of the President are able to seek and obtain a security clearance. The only way for Congress to fix this problem is for members to understand its full extent. We must ensure that all personnel in the U.S. government, regardless of administration or office, will be thoroughly vetted and will not pose a threat to our national security. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I thank Mr. DeSantis for introducing this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back. The chair supports the text of the underlying amendment, if not the dicta that went along with the text of the underlying amendment. Are there others who wish to discuss the amendment?
Chairman.
Gentlelady from the Virgin Islands.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I support the amendment offered by our colleague, Mr. Krishnamurthy, to H.R. 3210. And, you know, as we look back, and we had a hearing in February of 2017 of this year, and at that time, I asked the director of the National Background Investigations Bureau whether he knew whether or not any senior White House staffers who have access to sensitive material are under criminal investigation. At that time, he answered that he could not answer the question. We, as a committee, do not have basic information about who the decision maker is for the White House security clearances or how that person is making those decisions. In fact, we've had bipartisan support for those requests in the past, where our chairman at the time, Chairman Chaffetz, in that same hearing specifically asked OPM to get back to us with the request for that answer to that information. We sent questions for the record and understand that OPM, as well as the National Background Investigations Bureau, have been unable to answer those basic questions because their response to us has been that they are not involved in the process for the White House staff. We, as a committee, need to know the basic information about the White House's process for granting these security clearances, including how they are vetting their employees, how they conduct the investigations, who makes the final decision on the clearance, what factors they consider, and what their process is for suspending or revoking those clearances. So I think that this amendment will help us to answer these questions, and I hope that everyone on this committee will see the need as well as the efficacy and the support for us having this report for the work that this committee has to do. And I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady from the Virgin Islands yields back. Do other members wish to be heard? Gentleman's recognized. Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I share your perspective and your concern. I think the committee and Congress should have had an idea, should have had a clear process by which security clearances were conducted for the White House for a long-term period of time, not just this administration. Unfortunately, I think there are times we should step away from the the partisanship and do the bipartisan thing, which is understand what process by which people get clearances, how they override certain concerns, rather than target certain discussions. It makes it much more productive. Mr. Krishnamurthy and I are both freshmen. We've talked about the need to do those types of things. I would have been a lot more comfortable if we just talked about the need that Congress has to understand how people get security clearances in the executive branch, particularly in the White House. It should have been done last administration. It should have been done for many administrations. I support the amendment, but would suggest we move on from the ongoing discussion of which nation we're concerned about today and be concerned about how we manage our government. On that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back.
May I respond?
Sure. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for your comments, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Mitchell. I understand where you're coming from. I think that this particular report should illuminate the security clearance process, regardless of administration, regardless of president, regardless of party. That's not the issue. However, the most recent events illuminate the dire need for why we should be doing this now. And that's the spirit in which those comments are made. And I think we have to get to the bottom of this right now. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Do other members wish to be heard? The gentleman from Maryland, Professor Raskin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I move to strike the last word. As the representative from the 8th Congressional District in Maryland, where we have more than 88,000 federal employees, I've heard from a lot of my constituents with concerns about the security clearance process and the fear, the anxiety that there are disparities in treatment for different people. So I just want to rise in very strong favor of this amendment to say that we need some clarity as to how the process works, and we need some uniformity of treatment so it's fair for everybody going through the process. And with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Maryland yields back. Do all the members wish to be heard? Questions now on the amendment offered by Mr. Krishnamurthy. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any further amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from Virginia.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 3210 offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, is recognized for 5 minutes to explain the amendment, and without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
I thank the chair. This is a simple amendment that would require the National Background Investigations Bureau to report to Congress on duplicative costs. Last year, one small provision of the Defense Authorization Bill asked DOD to develop a plan to take responsibility for conducting background investigations of DOD personnel instead of the National Background Investigations Bureau. The Bureau, however, would continue to perform background investigations for almost all other government agencies. If that plan were implemented, resources and capabilities currently under the direction of the NBIB would have to be duplicated at the Department of Defense. This amendment would simply require that a report be provided to Congress on the cost of those duplicative resources. For Congress to make an informed decision, we need to be aware of who should be responsible for conducting background investigations and what the actual costs are. This amendment would simply provide that information to Congress. I believe it's been cleared again on both sides of the aisle, and I thank the chair and his staff for their cooperation.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on the amendment offered by Mr. Connolly. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments to the bill? Seeing none, the question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 3210 as amendment to the House of Representatives. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 2989, the Frederick Douglass Bicentennial Commission Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 2989 to establish the Frederick Douglass Bicentennial Commission.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. It's my understanding the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, will offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to the bill. Without objection, we will call up the amendment in the nature of the substitute, and then I will recognize Ms. Norton to give one statement on both the amendment in the nature of the substitute and the underlying bill. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2989 offered by Ms. Norton of the District of Columbia.
I'll now recognize the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you. If I might, just before we hear from the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Mr. Chairman, I just want to note that the bill before us would establish a commission to study and organize activities to commemorate the bicentennial anniversary of the birth of an extraordinary American, Frederick Douglass, next year. Mr. Douglass was born into slavery and during his lifetime became an internationally recognized abolitionist and champion for equal rights. He prodded Abraham Lincoln, sometimes beyond his tolerance, but he was respected by our 16th president. He also held himself several prominent federal positions. I'm pleased the federal government has already taken some steps to recognize Douglass on this anniversary, most recently by unveiling the 2013, a Frederick Douglass statue in Emancipation Hall in the United States Capitol Visitor Center. Many of us were there for that ceremony. It was quite moving. That was a gift from the District of Columbia. We can and should do more to recognize the contributions of Frederick Douglass. And with that, I yield to my good friend and colleague from the District of Columbia to explain her substitute.
Well, I thank my good friend from Virginia for his remarks, and I particularly thank the chairman for adding this bill to the markup. It is time sensitive because the work of the commission would have to be done in 2018, the bicentennial of Frederick Douglass's birth. Mr. Chairman, there is a Republican co-sponsor of this bill, Andy Harris, Representative Andy Harris of Maryland. Mr. Harris understands that Frederick Douglass also lived in Maryland. He spent most of his life in the District of Columbia. His home, Cedar Hill, is located in southeast Washington, is a National Park Service historic site, which is much visited by thousands of Americans every year. On his bicentennial, I think most Americans would want us to celebrate the birthday, the 200th birthday of this very great American born into slavery, taught to read by his mistress. Then he turned around to teach others to read. After 2 attempts, did escape from slavery and went to New York, went on to become one of the leading, if not the leading, abolitionists in the United States. Mr. Chairman, I cannot help but mention that Frederick Douglass was a lifelong Republican, and to say that
withdraw my support. No.
And to say in all sincerity that no African American of his generation, and this lasted for a number of generations, would have been anything but a Republican. It is the Republican Party that led in the abolition of slavery. And if I may say so, the District of Columbia got its first representation in the Congress from the Republicans who took over the Congress after the Civil War. Frederick Douglass was not only a lifelong Republican, he served in the Republican administrations of his lifetime. He was a close advisor of Abraham Lincoln. He was the U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia under President Rutherford B. Hayes. He was District of Columbia Recorder of Deeds under President James Garfield. In 1889, Benjamin Harrison appointed Frederick Douglass to be the U.S. Minister to Haiti. He was appointed by President Ulysses S. Grant as Secretary of the Commission of Santo Domingo. He was much used in the federal service. He was a man of great brilliance. Douglass, of course, was an abolitionist, but he dedicated his life to justice for all. He was an ardent and outspoken advocate for full voting rights and full rights for the people who lived in the District of Columbia. He's lived here 23 of his 57 years, but he is revered not for where he lived. He is revered for how he lived and what he did for our country. I very much appreciate your bringing this bill forward and ask for the support of my colleagues.
Gentlelady yields back. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Russell, for any statement on the bill or the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I applaud Ms. Norton for her outstanding work on this measure to find an effective way to celebrate the legacy of a person who dedicated his entire life to ensuring freedom and equality for future generations. Frederick Douglass, as mentioned, escaped from slavery to become an advocate for the full integration of not just African Americans, but securing the rights that ultimately resulted in the 14th Amendment in our Bill of Rights. He is an American icon who had enormous impact. I'm also proud to say that he was a Republican, as Ms. Norton pointed out. This commission presents an important opportunity to recognize the effective leadership that Mr. Douglass had in the fight for justice for all Americans. And I'd also like to thank not only Ms. Norton, but Mr. Connolly, Mr. Harris, Mr. Gosar, Mr. Ruppersberger, Mr. Costello for their support on the bill as well. And I urge my colleagues to not only support this bill, but also to pay a visit to the Frederick Douglass House, which is not far from us. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield any balance of my time to the delegate, my friend and colleague, Ms. Norton, if she so desires.
I didn't know the gentleman would be speaking for the bill, and I very much appreciate his speaking for the bill. He doesn't live close to here, but it does show you how important Douglass is for the nation. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and the gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and my friend and colleague from the District of Columbia, Representative Norton. I would like to be added as a co-sponsor and affiliated with all of the good things that's said about Frederick Douglass. He, as an abolitionist, went to London, and he met Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who are from the great state of New York, and they became great friends. And he came back to Seneca Falls and became one of the leaders, not only of the abolitionist movement, but also the right to empower women with the right to vote. He supported their efforts to organize and to work for this right. If you go to the home of Susan B. Anthony in Rochester, New York, she was arrested and put in jail for voting. She was the vessel of the women's movement in many ways. It never passed during her lifetime. But if you go to her home, the only photograph that is on her mantle is that of Frederick Douglass. And every year they have a play and a statement and a ceremony that commemorates the important role and support that he gave to the women's movement. Incidentally, the founders of the movement for abolition and also the right to vote, they were all Republicans, every single one of them. Susan B. Anthony was active in the Republican Party, as was Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So the really true leaders of the first empowerment for women to gain the right to vote came from Republican women from New York. But their best friend in many ways was this gentleman. They revered him. They were close personal friends. And if you look through their writings of their efforts during that time, Frederick Douglass was, he was also had his newspaper, didn't he? He had a newspaper. He did everything. When you think of it, that he was born in slavery and taught himself and became a leader in so many different fields, it's truly remarkable. So I really want to thank my colleague for focusing on our history and bringing it more alive as we remember it. He was also credited with being the driving force, as my friend from Oklahoma points out, for the 14th Amendment. So I proudly join my name, and I hope we can pass
Will the
this.
gentlelady yield?
I will always yield to my friend.
I really appreciate your bringing up something I should not have forgotten, that that Douglass was such an ardent proponent of suffrage for women. In the midst of his own struggles, he became enlisted and stood for the rights of all people, including women. I should say that that women were the first abolitionists before they, in the 19th century, before they advocated for their own suffrage. Women out of Christianity, their own sense that they advocated for the abolition of slavery. And I'd like to also say that Senator Van Hollen of Maryland, where Douglass also lived, has indicated he would be introducing this bill in the Senate today. And I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Gentlelady yields back. Do other members wish to be heard on the bill, or Professor Raskin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. As one of the members of the committee from Maryland, and in the absence of our ranking member, Mr. Cummings, it would be, I'd be remiss if I didn't lend my voice in very strong support of Representative Norton's Frederick Douglass Bicentennial Commission Act. Somehow I seem also not to be on it, and I would like to be added to it with the consent of the committee, with unanimous consent as an original co-sponsor. Frederick Douglass, of course, was born on the Eastern Shore. He grew up at the Wye River Plantation. We have lots of historical tours, which we would encourage everybody to come to in Maryland, that will yield fascinating insights into the life of Frederick Douglass. After he escaped from slavery, he went to Baltimore, and then he went further north, of course, made his way to Rochester, became a great Republican, a great abolitionist, a great feminist, a great suffragette, a great radical, a great agitator for freedom. And so Maryland shares in the pride that I know Representative Norton feels, because he became the Marshal of the District of Columbia in the Republican administration. And I just want to say that Maryland, the whole Maryland delegation, on a bipartisan basis, is very strongly in support of this act. And with unanimous consent, I would like to be added as well to the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members wish? The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also, with unanimous consent of the committee, would like to be added as an original co-sponsor. I want to thank Ms. Norton for your tremendous leadership on this particular bill, H.R. 2989. As a member from the land of Lincoln, I come from Illinois, I want to point out that Abraham Lincoln referred to him as the most meritorious man of the 19th century, and indeed, he's probably one of the most meritorious men or women of any century in the United States of America. And I think that in a time when, you know, well, first of all, I also want to say thank you to Mr. Gowdy and the Republican members of this committee for their very gracious comments about Mr. Douglass. And I can't say enough about how I'm so happy that you've introduced this bill. Thank you so much.
Gentleman yields back. To any other members who wish to be heard on the bill? We're now ready to start the amendment process. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If not, the question is now on the amendment in the nature of the substitute offered by Ms. Holmes Norton. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 2989 as amended to the House of Representatives. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 3243, the FITARA Enhancement Act of 2017. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 3243 to amend Title 40 United States Code to eliminate the sunset of certain provisions relating to information technology, to amend the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2015, to extend the sunset relating to the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative, and for other purposes.
Ask unanimous consent the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize the sponsor of the bill, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes to explain the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for including this bill in today's markup. And I also want to thank especially my partner with whom I co-sponsored the underlying act, FITARA, Darrell Issa, and Mark Meadows, who I know if he were here would say this is huge. This is the best and most important bill we're going to consider today, and everyone's going to love it. And my good friend Robin Kelly for her co-sponsorship as well. The legislation would extend 3 expiring provisions of what's called FITARA, the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act. This bipartisan legislation represented the very first major reform of the laws governing federal IT management and procurement since the Clinger-Cohen Act of 1996, and was enacted as a provision of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2015, I think after passing the floor of the House 3 times unanimously. When I meet with stakeholders in federal IT from government agencies and industry, I'm constantly reminded why previous major IT reform efforts fell short of their potential. The lack of a robust implementation plan and congressional oversight. Through countless hearings and briefings, close coordination with the Office of Management and Budget and the Government Accountability Office and the Oversight and Government Reform Committee's work on the FITARA scorecard. And I must congratulate our colleague Will Hurd and his ranking member, Robin Kelly, for coordinating with Mark Meadows and myself and the Government Operations Committee. The 2 subcommittees have really, I think, created a bipartisan model I hope can infect other parts of our work. But Congress, through that effort, has clearly indicated our commitment to robust oversight and our determination to make sure that the provisions of FITARA envisioned by Mr. Issa and myself will in fact be implemented. In working with GAO and OMB on FITARA implementation, we found that there are areas of the Act that would benefit from an extension of the original sunset dates. These areas include the provisions on federal data center consolidation, transparency and risk management of major IT systems, the IT dashboard and agencies' IT portfolio programs, and resource reviews, also known as portfolio stat. Simply put, the federal data center problem is bigger than we initially thought. We initially thought there were 1,100 data centers. We discovered there ended up being 11,700. In 2009, Vivek Kundra had set a goal of cutting that in half, and our bill cut it in half again. But it wasn't possible once federal agencies actually started auditing themselves and realizing the proliferation of data centers throughout the federal government. And so we need more time to make sure that consolidation occurs and the savings are effectuated. As GAO recommended, we're potentially leaving money on the table when it comes to that consolidation if we allow FITARA's data center reporting and planning requirements to expire in 2018. 23 agencies have reported $656 million collectively in planned savings for fiscal year 2016 through 2018. That's $3.3 billion less than the estimated $4 billion in planned savings for that same time period that GAO originally thought was possible. As of 2017, April of 2017, 23 of 24 agencies have submitted a strategic plan for data center consolidation, but of those 23 plans, only 7 included all of the required information required by this committee and our IT subcommittee. The remaining plans either partially met or did not meet the requirements at all. We need to let agencies know they're not going to run the clock on this committee, this Congress, when it comes to FITARA's transparency and reporting requirements and implementation plans. A limited extension on the data center provisions of FITARA, scheduled to sunset October 1 of 2018, will help us do that. That's the recommendation of Dave Potter and the Government Accountability Office. And I think most of us feel that's a common sense thing to do so that we can continue to build on the progress. And by the way, work with the new administration once it gets its full team in place. So I urge my colleagues to support this simple common sense bill. And I want to thank particularly my colleague Darrell Issa for his partnership over the years on these very important issues. I yield back.
Gentleman from Virginia yields back. We now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And partnerships in Congress matter, and no one has had a better partner than Gerry Conley. When we started this was known as Cohen-Clinger. Now it's known as Conley-Issa, and rightfully so, because as we observe the last administration and look through history, to be honest, Gerry started off saying we've got to consolidate those centers, and the number kept growing as you wanted to consolidate, which is sort of an interesting statement about government, is they don't know how much they have until you tell them to reduce it, and then you find out you have more than anyone ever admitted. The future of FITARA and the vision that my partner and I think, shared in the past and now have others who share with us is that, in fact, the idea that a ship can move in one direction if it has 5,000 sailors is only true if all the sailors are on board and going the same direction. When it comes to federal IT, we have a strong history of handing 5,000 sailors aboard a nuclear carrier, each $50, and telling them to go ashore, and shocked that they buy different beers and wines. The fact is that the teeth that were put in with FITARA and this committee's vigilant oversight and the tools with this extension are going to give us the ability to begin moving IT procurement in a way in which we will no longer be endlessly paying for systems that can't talk to each other to then pay more again so that we can sort of decipher what two different systems are doing. This is not a new problem. When Mr. Conley and I joined this committee a long time ago, it was an old problem. It was a problem when Cohen-Clinger was passed before either of us came to the committee. But it is a problem that we're beginning to address. And Gerry, I want to thank you for the fact that during the last administration, you pushed and prodded and went behind doors to get things done. And together we continue to have to do the same thing with the new administration, and particularly with OMB Director Mulvaney, who we served with, who is a believer, and yet, as you pointed out, does not have a full team yet. And so I look forward to using this as a tool to let those who would slow the process down know that they cannot outlast us. But also, this is a real opportunity to thank you for the fact that we've been working together for so long that they realize that we're not going away. And so, Mr. Chairman, I will urge the quick passage of something that if Gerry and I can agree on it, it could not be controversial, and yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
If I could just thank my friend Darrell Issa. He brought a wealth of experience in the private sector to this topic. And when he was chairman, he pushed this bill. And as I said, it took 3 tries. We got it passed out of this committee unanimously. We got it passed on the floor with Mr. Issa's leadership 3 times unanimously, and we finally got it through the Senate by mechanism of the Defense Authorization Bill.
Trickery will outdo all of those things.
But for his leadership, it wouldn't have become law, and it is a transformative piece of legislation. I salute my colleague and my friend Darrell Issa. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members wish to be heard on the bill? We're now ready to start the amendment process. Are there any amendments to the bill? The question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 3243 to the House of Representatives. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, pursuant to Clause 2L of the House Rule 11, members will have 2 days to submit views on the bills considered today. I would also ask unanimous consent. Staff be allowed to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the bills ordered reported today, subject to the approval of the minority. Hearing no objections, it's ordered. If there is no further business, and right before we adjourn, I just want to say thank you to all the members of the committee on both sides for their feedback and their engagement and involvement and patience and cordiality, and especially to the staff of the Oversight Committee as we worked our way towards this markup. And with that, we're adjourned.